Hello, this is Janet Gallen welcoming you to Love Letters Live. And today, Love Letters Live is really about romance. I want to introduce my guest, Michele Musy, who has a podcast of her own called Lovecapades. And how could I resist that? So, Michele is going to talk about romance with us. Michele, why don't you start and maybe just by saying hello if you like, and then telling us why you decided to share your lovecapades with the world.
Well, that's a great question. But
It's such a generous thing to do, you know?
well, and it's kind of a brave thing to do, actually, as it turns
That
out.
too.
Yeah, but before we start, I just want to say thank you to you, Jan. This is really a thrill. And I love your podcast. And I especially love the one that you had recently with Barbara Rose Brooker.
Oh, on getting older?
Yes, because I wanted to share with you and your listeners that I will turn 75 in January. And I was
You could be my little sister, but go ahead.
Oh my goodness.
We're the same kind of, yes.
I know. And I just think it's so thrilling to acknowledge women of a certain age who are still creative and relevant. So thank you for that.
Yes.
So, all right. So let me
what made you decide to share?
Well, what made me decide to write, I started writing my memoir, which is my romantic memoir, on Valentine's Day 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I had wanted to do for a long time. And the book poured out of me in 4 months. And the reason I chose to do it is that I wanted to examine my life from the prism of my experiences of love. And I've had a very unusual love history because even though I'm of an age where young girls were raised to get married and have a family, I didn't do that. I had a very
so let me start from far back then, since you're willing to.
Okay.
When did you first, well, what were you taught that you should be as a woman of the 40s and 50s?
That's a fabulous question. So I had a very dynamic and interesting father who raised me. I was the oldest of two. I had a younger brother. He raised me to be a woman of independence, a woman to have a career. Now, this was way before women's liberation.
But did that include sexual independence looking down the line?
No, he didn't deal with that part of
Okay.
it. But he wanted me to have a career. And he never gave me the imprint to marry and have a family, which is what everybody else was learning to do. So I didn't go that route for a variety of reasons. And that was one of the strong reasons. Mm-hmm. So instead of marrying when all my friends were marrying and having children, I was having adventures. And many of them were love adventures of all different varieties. I mean, some of them were happy, some of them were sad, some of them were romantic, some of them were terrifying, actually.
How old were you when you first felt that you had this romantic inclination?
Well, that's a good question because
I'm such a busybody, but I do like to know these things.
Well, this is kind of revealing, actually. So when I was 14, and it was 13 when I was a freshman in high school, and there was a sophomore named Bobby who absolutely had a thing for me. He was obsessed with me. And so he pursued me in every which way you could. And it made me nervous at first. But finally,
I was going to ask you about that. Was that a welcome thing or irritating?
At the time, I was too young to appreciate it. But he was so charming and so persistent that I succumbed to his charms. And he, of course, being a young adolescent guy, wanted to have sex. And in that era, it was just verboten. Young, proper women I'm sorry, you just didn't have sex. But he was too persuasive, Janet.
Really?
So at 14, I lost my virginity. And
Good for you in a way. I mean, that's so unusual.
So unusual. That's why I'm telling you, I have had a very unusual love history. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book and did the podcast. So Bobby and I dated all through high school. And
So, I shouldn't be so quick to say good for you, because I don't want to encourage young girls to do that, because you really have to be, and maybe you can talk about this, you have to be mature in a certain way to know what to do with a physical, intimate relationship, would you say?
absolutely. And I did not know what to do. I was so full of shame and guilt.
Oh,
And I could not share it with anybody. I was just too embarrassed. I couldn't share it with my parents. My mother was a prude, so I wasn't sharing it with her. I didn't even tell my best friend until I was a senior in high school. And that experience really did affect me for a long time afterwards. And it wasn't until a certain gentleman I met in Italy that I was able to conquer that shame and guilt.
and how many years later was this experience in Italy?
Well, I went to Stanford, and they had a campus in Florence that I went to. I was, 19 at the time, and so my first Italian romance was with a young boy named Roberto.
So there'd
And
been nobody between Bobby and Roberto then?
not really, I went through college, and I had crushes on people, but I didn't have relationships
Okay.
until my junior year when I met this Italian boy. And he used to take me on his Vespa up to Fiesole and serenade me in the moonlight. I mean, it was so romantic. But we did not engage in carnal activities until I graduated from Stanford and went back to Italy with a friend and was there for 6 months. And while in Florence, I met one of the true love capades of my life. And his name is Nicola. And he was a tall, handsome, kind of Marcello Mastroianni looking fellow in an army uniform. And he was actually from Palermo, Sicily, but he was doing his army service in Florence. So he met me. And again, he just had to have me, just had to have me. And I was very nervous about it because he was from Sicily. And my
What did
father,
that imply to you?
well, first of all, I had the Florentine snobby feeling that Sicilians were déclassé.
Oh, okay.
But my father had been a pilot in World War II and had harrowing experiences in Sicily. So I had that message all my life. Sicilians were scary. But this guy was so dreamy, Janet, and he wooed me in the perfect way. And we had this romance that I've never, ever gotten over. It was the most romantic experience of my life. And I was 22. And I spent time with him in Sicily. And then because he was a young doctor, he was a surgeon, and he wanted to come to California to become a doctor here. So once we spent time together and then I returned home, he wrote me all these love letters, which I
Oh, goodness.
still have.
Of course you do.
Still have them, and they're tied in a ribbon with hearts on them. I love hearts.
Good.
Yeah.
You apparently have a very big one yourself.
Well, hopefully.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, and just to fast forward a bit, so 50 years after that exciting romance, I actually found him again.
Now, you had not been in touch with him then once you left Italy. You kind of said goodbye to that.
Well, he did not fulfill his promise to come to California. So
Oh,
we lost touch.
okay.
And I did go back to Italy at a certain point and tried desperately to find him, but he had disappeared into the vapor. I kind of assumed that when we were dating, he had a former girlfriend who used to follow us around in her 500 Fiat like a shadow. And again, there is a sense of danger in Sicily. It's the mafia, and they're in the background. So this young, whatever, her name is Marika, used to follow us everywhere. So when I went back 2 years later and could not find him, I assumed he'd married her and that she was intercepting all my letters.
Uh-huh.
Lots of intrigue.
Really?
But in 2008, I returned yet again. I've been to Italy many times, yet again with a very dear friend of mine from Sydney, Australia. Her name is Trish the Dish, and I'm nicknamed Mish the Dish.
Yes.
So we were in Piemonte and we checked into this beautiful hotel, and I had this inspiration, this light bulb went off, which was, I wonder if we can find him now. So I asked the receptionist, whose name was Valentina, to Google him, and she found him,
Wow.
his phone number. And so after 3 or 4
Were
days,
you, excuse me, were you sitting side by side with her as she was Googling so you could see what was?
no, she was across the desk, but she found the information, which was just stunning.
Really?
It took me about 3 days to screw up the courage to call him, which I did. And that conversation, which is covered in detail in the podcast and the memoir,
Maybe
it,
you could do it for us here.
well, okay. So I dialed the number. I had about a whole
You
bottle.
can't just leave us hanging, you know.
Yeah, okay.
Go
Heaven,
ahead.
heaven forbid.
Right.
So I had about a full bottle of their beautiful red wine from Piemonte to get the courage up. Dialed the number, and this male voice answered. And I said, "Is this? Oh, this is all in Italian, so
Yes.
I can speak Italian." So I said, "Is this the home of Nicola Comparetto?" And the voice said, "Sì, sono figlio. I'm the son."
Yes. Oh.
So I said, "Well, is your father at home?" And he said, "Yes." And of course, I'm a wreck by this time. He comes on the phone, and I said, basically, "This is a voice from your past." And I said my first name, Michele, and he filled in the last name, Musy, as if you were kissing the name.
Oh.
It was unbelievable. Then he proceeded to ask me three very poignant questions. Sei ancora bionda? Are you still blonde? Sì. Sei ancora bella?
Yeah.
And the last one was the corker, because I've always been on the Zoftic side, a little bit round, curvy. And he said to me, and it's always been an issue with me, by the way, so it's a sensitive subject. He said, "Sei ancora robusta,"
Oh.
which was the sweetest word, I tell you, robust. In
And
other words,
he said it with affection.
absolutely.
Yes.
You got it. So
Oh.
anyway, we had this incredible conversation. And he said, "Well, are you coming to Palermo?" And I said, "Well, not now, not really." But he shared his cell phone and this and that. And again, I didn't see him that time. And then fast forward even further to this last year, or actually this year, when I had finished the book and I had started the podcast, I tried desperately to find him again.
But you had a stepping stone to go from this time.
Well, I had the cell phone number, which
Yeah.
I tried, and it didn't work. So I figured he changed his number. This is 2008 to 2020. I
Uh-huh.
mean, 2020. So, but I'm a very persistent girl. So I kept looking and looking. I tried LinkedIn. I did this. I did that. I even found a girl in Sicily with the same last name who we corresponded over
And
LinkedIn.
this time you were doing this, you were in Italy again. You were
No,
doing this,
I was here at home,
you were doing it long distance. Okay.
long distance. So ultimately, I found his email. And so we started to have this email conversation. Now it went on and on. And I was trying to get him to answer certain questions that I still had in my heart. But unfortunately, the email was a family email.
Oh my goodness.
So his wife and whoever else could see the correspondence.
Right.
So we couldn't be all that candid. And it turned out he did not marry Marika, the little shadow in the 500 Fiat.
Right.
He married, of all things, a Polish girl. And they had three extraordinary children, whom he told me all about. So anyway, I did have a conversation with Nicola. And so this is a theme in my life, Janet, that I have had many extraordinarily fascinating relationships because I didn't follow the path to marry. I did marry for a short time, but that didn't work
I was
out.
going to ask you, uh-huh.
Yeah, it's not worth going into that story. It's not such a happy one. But thematically, many of these fascinating men I've had relationships with circle back. They come back. I mean, Bobby, for instance, my high school boyfriend,
Uh-huh.
he's still in my life. He's
This is
still, he still says he loves me after
I'm
3
sure he does. By the way, I have to tell you that I just, when we started out, when we spoke before, I never knew that this would be something so dreamy and adventurous.
Oh, and that's a great word you've chosen.
Oh,
My life has been an adventure. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to share it with listeners, with readers, because it's first of all, it's very entertaining, but it's also very inspiring
there
and
are
deep.
lessons to be learned.
Absolutely.
May I ask you a question about, so Bobby is still in your life. What is your friendship with him like? Nice, obviously.
Well, right now it's kind of on a downslide.
Oh,
I think he's nervous about this book I've written. But there have been many moments over the years, as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, where he claims to be still in love with me. And of course, that's a little frustrating since anyway, it's all in the podcast.
oh,
But here again, Nicola, 50 years later, I still have a correspondence with him. Many of the other fascinating men that I have met and been involved with circle back later, which tells me that, I'm a very confident woman and I've had a very successful real estate career. But in the area of men women relationships, I'm not as confident, even though I've had all these experiences. So one of the things that happens in the book, in the stories, is I reflect on that. And so it's not just about a series of escapades, sexual escapades. It's about what these various experiences have meant to me.
okay.
And
So I was gonna ask you just that because I was wondering in sharing this, as you know, this is a very generous thing for a woman to do, and as you said, very brave thing for a woman to do.
very
I agree. There must have been something that you wanted to share for a reason. You want to encourage, you want to let people know something, right? Do you want to let women know something, or do you want to let men know something as well?
I think both,
Uh-huh.
actually. I
And
mean,
what would you like them each to know based on your?
well, one of the things that I want women to know is that, that we're strong and independent in our own right, that we do not have to live our lives through a man. And that's one of the choices I made as a very young person. And I have acted on that my whole life. So I encourage women to be their own true, strong selves. The men, it's interesting. I've had many relationships with European men and even some, other Latin lovers. And what I found about the difference between men in Europe and the men in America is that the men in Europe somehow are raised to cherish women. Each woman is a blossom. Each woman is a flower to behold and to unfold. And when you're with them, whether you're only with them for 4 or 5 hours, you feel like a princess. They could be with somebody else the next day, and it doesn't matter because when you're with them, you are a
And
goddess.
you think that's in general rather than the reality is that you are a princess and you were something special to each of. No, it's a real question.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see where you would assume that from how they behave towards
Well,
you.
no, it's not just my
Okay.
personal experience. I think it's
The cultural.
a cultural thing. And for instance, I had a dear friend in the real estate business. He was the head of an escrow company. His name was Luis Fuenzalida. He was from Chile. And he explained this to me. He said, my father taught me as a young boy that every woman is somebody to be cherished. And I think this is an attitude, you say a cultural attitude that comes down from decades and centuries.
Sure.
It's not universal, of course. That's not true of every European man or every South American man. But I think it's much more prevalent than it is with American men.
What
Who,
is your experience with American men been
well,
like?
my experience with American men is different, is that they don't get that lesson. They don't get that perspective.
What do they get?
Well, they get, in my milieu, um, I always felt that what was more important was a trophy wife, in a sense. In other words, they want somebody that presents well to the business world, to the rest of the world, rather than just a one-on-one thing. That's an element, at least. And it's different. It's just
Mhm.
different.
Are you
I think.
dating now?
I wish I could say I was. And
Oh, but you're open to it, certainly.
yes, and it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Was that's the other big reason, is to create a vibration of love to attract my soulmate. And this has been my whole life, a journey to find that soulmate. And it hasn't happened yet, but I believe in it. I believe there is uh, that kind of love.
Well, I do too. I mean, I have known women in my life who have found really just a profound, wonderful, heat-filled love. And
Yes.
one I met, she had a beautiful diamond ring. She had very long, narrow hands, and she was actually playing bridge with somebody. I walked by her table, a friend of my mother-in-law's, and I said, "Oh my goodness, that ring looks so beautiful on your hand." It was just the whole thing was gorgeous. And she looked at it, and she was in her 90s,
Oh wow.
and she said, "Yes," she said, I've been so fortunate to have had the love of two wonderful men in my life. And this ring was from a man she met when she was past 80. I mean,
I
have you
love.
known women who have had really,
Well, and that's what that's my expectation. And I also the another part of the book which we haven't had a chance to really explore is the mystical spiritual part. I
okay,
have
go ahead.
yeah, I've had a lot of mystical and fascinating experiences in that realm. And so as the book unfolds, more and more of the spiritual comes into it. I've had, for instance, I've done a lot of past life regression work.
Oh,
And
you know what? I want you to hold that for a minute because we're limited in time. And so I'm wondering, will you come back and do another one with me on that aspect?
absolutely,
Oh, wouldn't that be interesting?
I'd be
I mean, I'm sure it
delighted.
is.
It's pretty darn fascinating. And one
Well,
of them has to do with Bobby.
okay. Oh, I'll be back for this. This is great. My question next, I've got so many questions all the time, is where, I mean, well, you saw that conversation I had with Barbara Rose Brooker on
Right.
women getting older and still looking for love and expecting to find it. And
Exactly.
there are some men, older men I know, who really want to be with younger women. And I think that's two things. I think partly is it presents well, as you say, but partly I think it makes them feel that if they can still attract a young woman, it says something for their power in youth.
Mhm.
And I've known a couple of men who have started off that way and ended up marrying women close to their own age.
Which I'm sure is in the end more fulfilling for them.
Yes, I think so.
I
I
think
think
so.
I think that may be a lot for a man to have to keep up with, a man who's 80 and has a 25-year-old girlfriend. Not that that can't be great for both. I actually knew a couple. Oh my goodness, he was like 95. She was like in her 30s. She was the nurse for his wife, and then she died, and something like a neighbor, and they had such a romance. And I will tell you that she really adored him.
Wow.
Adored him.
Love
He was
is
pretty adorable.
well, love is amazing, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, it comes in so many forms. And why limit yourself? That's another thing that I wrote the book for, is why limit yourself? Experience all of these forms of love. There's so many of them.
So, do you ever go on these dating sites? I know Barbara Rose Brooker has done that.
That's an incredibly interesting question. So in one of the episodes that I just recorded, because I've released the first 10 episodes and now we're doing another 21 episodes, which finishes the book. I years ago, the only thing you could do was put a classified ad in the newspaper. So
Right.
so I did this really as a marketing expert in real estate, I did this very provocative ad. It started off bedroom eyes. And I wrote this ad and I put it in the Bay Guardian and the Palo Alto Weekly. I had 189 responses.
Well, what were your key words?
Well, it was like voluptuous, 5'4", dynamic woman looking for white male 35 to 50 to appreciate our assets. I mean, it was just very clever. And
Okay,
actually,
but you portrayed yourself as you really are.
yeah, well, yeah.
Well, not
And,
everybody does that, I understand.
that's true. I was trying to be honest.
Good.
And that ad, the picture of that ad is actually posted on my Facebook page called Love Capades. So if people want to see the whole ad, they can go to that.
I'm going to be there. Okay.
So anyway, I had the 189 responses, and it was like a sack, a Santa Claus sized sack of letters. And I invited my girlfriends over. We sat on.
Oh wait, so they responded with actual letters.
That was their only choice. This was way before.
Right. Okay, I understand. Yes, I see.
So I had this sack of letters that I got from the newspaper, forwarded from the newspaper. And I invited my gal pals over. We sat in a circle on the lawn in my backyard on beach towels, and we read the letters out loud. And it was hysterical. I mean, formerly I was a high school English teacher. So before I became a realtor. So I graded them A, B, C, D, and F. And I picked the top 5 letters, Janet, and I had coffee dates with these guys. They were all total duds.
Oh,
they had fibbed or they had exaggerated. Anyway, it was.
That's what I would say. People don't present themselves so honestly.
Don't.
Oh.
So here I had this experience of all of these responses, and they were all duds. So I never have been willing to go on a dating site.
Sure.
However, yesterday, when I recorded the last episode, it described this whole experience with the letters. And for the first time in like 40 years, I thought, well, maybe I should try it.
You should.
Because in the pandemic, I wouldn't have to meet them right away. I could just have correspondence. Yeah. And maybe in the correspondence, there would be something there.
And also, I guess, you can see each other over Zoom or FaceTime. You can actually see somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I hope you do it. I want to thank you for doing this with me.
Well, it's just been a delight.
It has been a delight for me. It's somehow different than I expect. Well, I don't ever go into it with really expectations, but just wonderful.
Well, it's just been great fun. And I'm in the mode, of course, of trying to get my podcast out there. So can I just remind people where to go?
Yes, of course. Please do.
All right. So again, it's called Love Capades, and that's a word I made up. LOVE, capital CAPADES. And you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you go for podcasts. You just put in Love Capades. And the first 10 episodes.
If you put in Love Capades in the Google search, you'll get it.
Yeah. And then you subscribe, of course. And you can also find my website, which is called Love Capades, and my Facebook page.
Okay.
And I'm just thrilled to be your guest, and I admire you so much.
I'm thrilled to be meeting you and hearing all this. I think that oh gosh, I've wondered about this, of course. It's such a weird time to want to be meeting people and dating and getting to know people, because you can only, and who knows for how long, you can only go so far.
Right. Well, we'll see. But I haven't given up, because my core philosophy is this: if you have a desire for something and you truly believe it, then you place the order with the universe, and the universe has to deliver the goods.
I like that.
And the universe has got far more resources than we as individuals.
Yes, that's true. A much bigger Rolodex.
Exactly.
Yes.
So anyway, that's the way I look at it. And right now, I still believe that my soulmate is going to be there before I leave this earth plane in this incarnation.
I do too. And I just want to say that no reason why not. I mean, you're smart, you're adorable, and you're beautiful. And somebody will come to you.
Well, I think so. It's about time, don't you think?
Yes, yes. Thank you, dear. This has just been enlightening to say the least. And
Mhm.
I'm gonna talk to you again, and we're gonna talk about the spiritual side of things.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Thank
All right.
you.
Have a great Christmas.
Mwah. Take
Bye.
care. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye, everybody.